Hi everyone, I'm Nick Cosby from Modulus Labs. This is Reflections on ZKML, or Zero Knowledge Machine Learning. If you don't know us, Modulus Labs, that's what we're all about. We want to basically solve the problem of the fact that compute on-chain is very limited by traditional standards. So, a big machine learning model, like an LLM, is possible to prove even on like a laptop. But in a distributed environment, like an L2, even in L2, it's just completely infeasible right now. So basically, our goal is that if we could create ZK proofs for huge computation, like machine learning models, then we could use whatever logic we want in a smart contract and not add any trust assumptions. And basically what this talk will be about is basically detailing how far we are from an ideal ZKML product. So to get more concrete on what a ZKML product looks like, we built a few months ago Leela versus the World, which was basically a chess game where the black pieces would be controlled by an AI model, a smaller version of Leela Chess 0 with about 3 million parameters, which is way more compute than you could fit on a distributed network or even an L2. And then the white pieces would be controlled by people's votes, and players could bet on the outcome. So the reason why this needs to be secure is that we, the operators, if we have a stake in the betting market, then we have an incentive to basically swap out the AI with one that is much stronger or much weaker, depending on what we bet. So basically, if you want to be able to trust this betting network, you need to be able to be sure that we can't do that. And the same property of trustless, impartial AI decision makers can be used for lots of things, like trustless LLM outputs, which could lead to an impartial judge, impartial summaries of public info, trustless credit scores, trustless appraisals. We have been researching these things, and there's lots of potential here. But in order to do that, you actually need to have this trustless property. The question is, what's wrong with just using off-chain compute? Compute this in an untrusted environment, and then connect it to your smart contract just using, like a multisig or even just an individual address check. To put it in the concretest terms possible, what is the downside of abandoning the trustlessness that the chain typically offers? Maybe that's a cheap shot. FTX is an exceptional situation, but ultimately I think we believe, and a lot of people in the community believe, that when you abandon the opportunities the chain provides to be trustless, you are opening the door for bad actors to come in. The advantages of a trustless system is not just that you shut out the fraudsters, but also that you can create a system that can scale much beyond what you can support. Ethereum is so much bigger right now than any of its creators, and that is because it is permissionless, so anyone can come in and make it even larger. Ultimately, the difference between a trustless system and a non-trustless system is that in a non-trustless system, like traditional finance, you need to rely on reputation and regulation to be safe from fraudsters. But in a trustless system, you have other options, and that's what crypto is exploring right now. But in order to reach that potential, you need to stick with the fairly strict requirements of trustlessness. So what are those requirements? What do you need to make trustlessness worth it? Well, you need to convince even non-technical people that your system is secure. It's great if you have an optimistic fraud system that has economic guarantees that your money can't be stolen, or a ZK proof where you can send just a handful of random-looking numbers and you can be sure that your money can't be stolen. But those are fairly arcane things. You need to actually convince people that their money won't be stolen. There is a gap there that can't be crossed without significant effort. You need actual airtight security. Ultimately, security is always going to be a chain. The weakest link will break everything. I know that right now, for very good reasons, lots of smart contracts have upgrade keys that aren't especially well secured. And it's understandable why they want to do that right now, but that's still a weak link in the chain of security that will eventually bite someone. And finally, you need to clearly communicate exactly what you are guaranteeing. One of the biggest smart contracts on Ethereum is Uniswap. But the Uniswap, despite having many trustless guarantees, does not guarantee that you'll make money if you choose to be an LP. Things like impermanent loss could screw you over. the actual guarantees that the Uniswap smart contract offers are fairly precise and specific, and if you don't clearly communicate those, people will feel like they're cheated, even though it's just the system operating as intended. So that's the bar. That's the bar that's set by Ethereum and many other distributed systems right now. It's the bar set by many smart contracts on Ethereum that go through processes of auditing, highly secure, they open source everything they do. Right now, ZKML projects, such as those released by us, released by other people, are not meeting that bar. It's not an indictment of the space, it's just the fact that it is a relatively young space. We don't have the time to do that. But it's still the fact that right now the consumer education on what exactly it means to create a ZK proof of an ML model is not great. We've tried to make blogs, but there's still a lot left to communicate. Of the smart contracts and the circuits that we put out, there are many gaps in security. I'm fairly sure if I put my mind to it, I could create a fake proof for Leela. And most importantly, I would say, despite the fact that we have open source everything and almost everyone in the space is doing the same, the circuits themselves are very opaque. It's very difficult to go into our code bases and determine what is actually being proven. And so long as that is the case, it's difficult to say that you're proving anything, right? If you can't actually show someone what you're proving. And of course, this kind of limited trustlessness is all coming right now at a very high cost. Leela cost about $5K a month, and it took an hour to generate each proof for about a 5 million parameter model. So basically, for the rest of this talk, I would like to describe to you kind of a bright vision of the future of what an ideal ZKML product would look like that might come about in 2 to 3 years, and talk about the potential of it and also the problems with it so that we can start to think carefully about the future we want. So some properties the ideal ZKML product might have are a decentralized prover network where, similar to any other network, you can have basically transactions that come in with some inputs, a model you want proven, and some payment for the network. And then permissionlessly, any actor can come in and generate a proof for that, and keyly batch that proof as well for efficiency reasons. And then the batched proof of many people's transactions would be posted to chain, and those values could be used by smart contracts. You would also need easy to define circuits that prove models securely. Right now, if you go using existing tools, or most existing tools, to create a ZKML circuit, not only will it be extremely difficult, but you have a high chance of basically screwing up and making a circuit that doesn't prove anything. It's surprisingly easy to do. I know I've done it, though never in production, thankfully. And most importantly, I would say a circuit representation that is easy to understand, audit, and check. Again, so far everything we've put out has been open sourced, but if you wanted to actually check that the Leela circuit that is open source matches the smart contract that is deployed on chain, you would need to put in a massive amount of work, a large amount of compute, probably like a 30 to 40 gigabyte machine, and there's no guide for it, no utility. Whereas in Uniswap, if you want to check that, there are utilities that can do that very easily. And you can just look at the code on Etherscan in a fairly understandable way. So that's one possible vision in the future. But there are certain things it doesn't cover, some caveats with that. The first is the case of private inputs, say biometrics. WorldCoin has been doing some interesting work on this. And one of the big points of WorldCoin is that your iris scan never needs to be posted to a public place. But if you want to work with that private input and plug it into a machine learning model, then the private input can't be shared across a permissionless network. You also have the issue of basically making sure your private inputs match up with reality. So again, if you give a picture of your face and send it into a machine learning model to check that it is a real human's face, how do you know it wasn't generated with AI? How do you know it's your face as opposed to something you took from the internet? You need some way of checking that the things you're putting into the model come from reality as opposed to come from an imaginary source. And this is especially a problem with AI models because AI models have kind of these adversarial attacks against them, which are fairly easy to do if you know what the model is. The typical way to solve this is a la WorldCoin having kind of trusted sensors where you trust that the data from this sensor came from a particular place at a particular time, these kinds of things. But right now, the support for this in terms of hardware just doesn't exist. So private inputs are fairly challenging. There's also the batching problem. Again, you don't want every user who's making a proof with private input to have to post a proof on chain, because that's like a $20 cost each time you do it on L1. You want to be able to match things together for efficiency reasons, but doing this with private inputs could be tricky. There's also the even more common case where basically the person who has the ML model wants to be able to prove things about it, but they don't want to open source their model. They don't want to give everyone else their model because they've spent a lot of money to train it. They don't want to give up their advantage. They don't want to give up their alpha. It doesn't exactly follow the decentralized creed, but it's a very common case that we've seen, and we want to support these people's desires without losing security. But it's tricky when you're proving a private model. What exactly are you proving? You don't have a statement which you can point to, like we're proving that model. Model's private. Basically, what you end up doing is proving the consistency of the model. So you can start in the setup phase, take the model through a test suite of like 10,000 public tests and show, okay, this model that did well on this test suite is the same model that we're now using to prove. That's one way of doing it, but there's still security concerns here. For example, you can train in a backdoor to the model, where if the inputs look like this, it won't use the model input, or it won't use the model, it will do something much dumber and less secure. We could solve this with audits, where an auditing firm comes in and says, well, the private model which matches this commitment does not contain any security holes. You could try a proof of training solution. So prove that the training process was done on only input from on-chain, for example. So there's no way to slip in well-poisoning data that would cause a backdoor. This is something we need to explore more, but there's definitely enough demand for it that it's worth exploring. So that's a picture of the future. Moving back to reality, the reality where we're nowhere near any of these levels of security guarantee in a lot of areas, where basically even just generating proofs for large AI models is cumbersome enough that there's no way to decentralize it. What are the next steps? The immediate things we need to do this month, next month, to get us to that future eventually. Well, obviously you need technical improvements. Thankfully, ZK cryptography is rapidly developing. We at Modulus Labs have been a part of making that happen to the best of our ability. We're happy to, but it's important to understand that these efficiency gains create new use cases. So if you have an AI model that improves the risk calculus of a DeFi product and saves you 10 cents per transaction because of that, well, that's pretty worthless if the ZK proof of that AI model costs $1 per transaction. But it's pretty great if the ZK proof costs 2 cents per transaction. So we're basically seeing that as we improve the efficiency of AI models, we're getting more use cases that are available. And the culmination of this work, our research into improving the efficiency, called Remainder, will be coming in about a month or so. So look forward to that. Ultimately, though, the most important next steps that we need to take, and that hopefully we as a community can take, is discovering the ideal product. Right now, I'm just, talking out of my mouth. But in order to find what actually works for people, what actually makes people feel secure, and what actually makes them secure, we need to try things, experiment, and discover what the ideal product looks like. So to recap, trustlessness is fragile. It's difficult to achieve, and if you mess up in any one place, it nearly all goes away. And ZK applications, I've been using ML, but basically any ZK application this applies to, is a long way from reaching that bar, except for rollups, which are much closer. And importantly, we as a community can do better by again, just trying things, experimenting with ZKML, and seeing what works and what doesn't. Thank you for the listening. If you have any questions, I'm happy to use my remaining time to answer them.
Yeah, so trustless is not bias-free. So I was wondering if you comment on the extent to which some of these ZKML trustless approaches, proofs, could either measure or quantify the bias of these models.
Well, I guess it depends on what you mean by bias. Again, the ZK proof only proves what you put in. If you have a model that refuses to give loans to black people, then you're going to prove that loan. The only way you could use ZK proofs to measure bias is by just creating a test suite and seeing how it responds on, say, again, just using this example, a racially diverse set of inputs, and seeing if there's some change you don't expect when you run it through that test suite. But in that case, if you did that work of putting it through the test suite, you could be sure that the model which is used in production is the one that passed this test suite.
So the most interesting thing, I think, the most interesting challenge ahead is like, how do we convince, let alone this room, like the people out there, that any of this matters? Like, how do you think about like explaining ZK to like our moms and dads, and like how to bridge that gap? Or is this really about educating the most advanced people and then letting trust filter down through that?
To repeat the question, he's basically asking, how do we communicate the fact that this matters to non-technical people? I kind of said this was very important, but didn't describe any strategies, so thank you for pointing that out. There's basically two aspects to it. The first is convincing them that it matters, and the second is convincing them to actually trust the result. I think the first is much more important than the second. Right now, people either don't have a lot of money or use their money in ways that aren't particularly trustless. Like when you use your money outside the crypto community, you're doing it in a way that relies on a ton of trust and a ton of regulation. And convincing people to move to a completely different regime that relies on technical guarantees as opposed to reputation and regulation will be very difficult. That's a long-term fight that the entire crypto community has to continually try and convince people of. In terms of getting them to trust the outputs of a ZK proof, I think there are ways to simplify the validity proof arguments in a way that even a layperson can understand. I know some of the things I've read on ZK have been wildly more helpful than others. That's going to be different for each person. But if we can make sure each audience receives the right level of technical explanation for their skill level, I think we can do a lot towards making them understand at a gut level why validity proofs are valid and convincing.
Can you explain the rationale of Modulus for choosing to focus on generative art first, as opposed to something, say, like a recommender system, which might be more germane to more users in the blockchain space? And part two, are you guys using Halo 2? I was looking through the code base, and I think that's what I was seeing.
Okay. First question was why us Modulus Labs are focusing on generative art. I'm assuming you're talking about the Polymon project that is coming out in a week or two. And the simplest answer was just because Polymon offered to work with us on this, and they're a great NFT company. We knew that NFTs was something we wanted to experiment with, but we also knew that we didn't have any experience or connections in the space. So having a partner like that who could help us interact with the NFT community was such a good opportunity, we couldn't turn it down. And the second question on what all of our the code base we've currently released and what all our proof of concepts use, that proof system is Halo 2, but we are moving away from it as we build our own proof systems that are more specialized for machine learning, like Remainder. Oh, sure. Sorry, you wanted to ask about private models? No. Yeah, so so he's asking what I mean by the consistency of the model. And when you have a public model, it's easy to say, the model I'm proving is the model that lives in this code base. And then you can do whatever checks you want to do on that model to satisfy your suspicions. But when the model is private, you can't say anything about the model that's private, right? You can't look at it, you can't run any tests on it. All you can do is say that the model used in inference 1 and inference 10 million is the same model. And if you do things like run that model through a test suite of 10,000 options, then that can actually be pretty powerful. But you are still giving up a fair bit of security when you keep your models private.
If you have like 1 trillion weights,
So in terms of proving 1 trillion weights, that would be pretty hard. It's pretty much the same as any other level of computation. It scales currently sublinearly, but with the improvements, it'll be a linear increasing cost as the number of parameters increases. I think I'm out of time, but thank you so much.